Hello and welcome to Ricardo's Future Mobility channel. This is first in a series of mobility conversations we are initiating on a variety of advanced mobility and future mobility topics. Today we're going to talk about autonomous technology and the implications on the traditional vehicle supply chain. My name is Anish Podalkar. I'm a principal at Ricardo Strategic Consulting. I'm joined by a couple of my colleagues, Mark Wiseman, who heads our Global Mobility Group, and Mike Blythe, who is also a principal at the Ricardo Strategic Consulting UK office. Welcome, gentlemen. We're going to start off with an overview of why we chose this topic to discuss. This, along with some others, we're going to form a series of discussion topics, as I mentioned. We have a future mobility channel that you can subscribe and like and all those great stuff. You can visit our website. We'll provide that information towards the end of the discussion. But let me pass it on to Mike, who can provide an overview of the topic, and then we can jump into the discussion. Mike?
Yeah, thanks, Anish. That is a great question. So we're seeing the start of disruption of the whole transport industry coming from a number of different directions, a number of different factors. And we'd normally group those as connected, autonomous, shared and electrified vehicles. Now, one of the most important things to do at the start is just to pause and focus on definitions. We're talking about autonomous driving functionality today rather than, say, advanced driver assistance features, and we follow the SAE definitions. So by that we are talking about SAE level 4 and also level 3 autonomous driving today. That means the vehicle can control its own speed and direction without a human driver needing to do that. Now, level 3 vehicles do need a human driver in the vehicle to monitor the road ahead just in case, and to be able to step in to control the vehicle in certain circumstances. That really doesn't deliver a lot of the benefits we're talking about here, aligns to fully driverless operations. So we're going to focus on level 4 driverless autonomous operation today, which really unlocks the potential for the occupants of the vehicle to be much more productive and allows the removal of a driver from the vehicle altogether in certain geofenced environments. As a side note, we're not going to be talking about level 5 operation today. That's because we just don't think that's technically feasible for the next decade or so, and it's just not the focus right now. So that's somewhere down the road.
Yeah, nice. Mike, the question that comes to my mind almost immediately is where will we see autonomous technology penetrating? Which segments do you think it will impact first? And also, what are some of the main drawbacks or constraints you see with the technology that the industry and mainly consumers will face in the near term?
Okay, so that's two questions. Let me start with the first. So it's important to note that both for personal mobility and for the transport of goods, we're likely to see autonomous driving happening in different places initially. So one thing that they share is that it's primarily the business case that drives autonomous driving here. So starting first with commercial vehicles or the transport of goods, actually that's where we see autonomous driving first. We believe that on the highway is where you'll see autonomous trucks operating first, and there's a number of reasons for that. Firstly, again, is the business case. We've seen that a really significant portion of the operating costs of commercial vehicles is driver labour. So by removing the driver, for particularly those very long haul routes where the driver's spending a lot of time in the vehicle, the business case is very compelling. Also, it happens that from a technological perspective, that operating environment is quite simple. There's certainly none of the complex interactions with pedestrians, or there shouldn't be at least on the highway. We'll see commercial vehicles transporting goods operating first on the highways. Now, almost the opposite is true, we believe, for personal mobility. So there is demand in some cities, and I stress some because a lot of regional differences exist, in some cities for autonomous driving throughout the city and the wider city. Now, the city centre itself is a very complex operating environment, and whilst we will see autonomous vehicles operating in that area, we believe that first we'll see autonomous vehicles transporting people in the suburbs where perhaps people don't have such good access to existing public transport, but it's still very difficult to operate and park a private vehicle. So personal mobility, suburbs first.
Internally, we were one of the things we are doing is assessing the cost of autonomous technology. We have a separate discussion on that topic, and one of the things that is challenging is outside of the hardware and the software cost piece to put a risk premium on what the liability could be. Mike, do you think that is a major barrier today? What are the other barriers do you feel that the industry will and the consumers will face for adopting this technology?
Another great question. So, actually, turning it slightly on its head, to enable the operation of autonomous vehicles, there needs to not only be development of the technology on the vehicle, but also the technology of the vehicle and the wider, I don't really like the term ecosystem, but the wider environment in which these vehicles operate, including policy and things like insurance, obviously the legality of these vehicles, policy for what's required to bring these to market, and from a manufacturer perspective, what's required to actually validate these and validate that they're safe for operation. Those are all wider challenges that need to be solved before we'll actually see the advent of autonomous vehicles on the road.
Point. Perhaps it's a good segue to take a step back and talk a bit about the autonomous stack. We hear this term quite a lot. Mark, would you mind explaining what an autonomous stack is? And perhaps that would be a good segue to talk about the traditional value chain around the autonomous technology.
Yes, sure. Thanks, Anish. So the autonomous stack is really the features that are implemented for autonomous driving through hardware and software. It can actually be viewed as a series of layers. You know, these layers help the vehicles be able to perceive what's happening on the roads, be able to think about where they're going, and then be able to act to drive the vehicle safely and securely. Those layers are the sensors, the radars, the lidars, camera systems, through to the connections with the infrastructure for high definition maps and traffic information, and then controlling the electrical architecture of the vehicles. And each part of that has some hardware capability, but also a significant amount of software processing, fusing of sensors, and then being able to determine the motion of the vehicles. And we're seeing a number of companies involved in this space, the traditional OEMs and the tier ones, plus a number of the emerging companies that are providing innovation in the software areas and actually helping to bring a lot of this technology forward to the marketplace.
Yeah, very interesting. And the next point, I'd like to get both your guys' opinion. We talked a bit about how the autonomous system is structured around the hardware piece. So you have LiDARs potentially, and it's a debate whether LiDARs are truly necessary. It seems like the industry is, majority of them at least, are adopting LiDARs, and you have radars and night vision cameras, HD maps, and then a central processor. From a traditional value chain perspective, you have OEMs and tier ones who will form and provide certain value within various features of the stack. And then you have IT companies potentially coming into the fray as well. How do you guys see this value chain changing? And where is the value differentiation option? And what is the outlook for such a thing going into the future?
Okay, if I could just comment on that first, I think it's a really interesting point about differentiation. And historically, we've seen manufacturers of vehicles differentiate themselves through the experience the driver has with the vehicle, so the performance of the vehicle, or the way it handles on the road, or how comfortable it is for the driver or potentially the backseat passenger, depending on the model. The way autonomous vehicles are likely to be differentiated obviously won't be targeted at the driver, more at the occupants, and maybe the way the consumer in general interacts with the vehicle. So your question was very much related to the supply chain, I think, but the more important question is the top end of the food chain, if you like. The OEM may actually only end up selling cars B2B to whichever company owns the consumer relationship. So if that is the mobility service provider or some other IT company that has a captive client base, they are likely to just buy vehicles direct from the OEM and sell an experience to the consumer directly.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting question about where does the value on the vehicles go to, and to Mike's point here that we now start to move from more of a sort of consumer focus for the features, but the selling might be business to business. We've done a number of studies looking at the evolution of the electrical architecture and the software architecture. We currently have a proliferation of ECUs on the vehicles, from 50 on a mainstream vehicle to over 100 on luxury vehicles. And that seems to be continuing. So currently today, a significant amount of the value is in hardware. But as we look at the future, much more of this is going to be the software-based processing. And with OEMs going to want to keep a focus on reducing cost, going to more centralized ECU architectures, there's going to be a lot of pressure for cost reductions on the hardware. But we see software continuing to grow in value. So really the value chain is going to switch to those companies that really have capability and innovation in the software side that supports the hardware. So we see that as being quite a change today, where we're traditionally a mechanical engineering sort of value-based system. It's going to move into much more software engineering value-based solution. So not surprising that we see, Apple, Google, Nvidia, Amazon, and a number of the other companies out there, Microsoft as well, that are looking to move into this space, as well as a number of startups that are bringing software innovation to the automotive market space.
I think also software innovation is a key point there, and there is a risk potentially to tier ones that OEMs, as they build this software development capability, may bypass the tier one and work directly with tier two suppliers of autonomous driving technology within the stack or software. So there's a bit of risk there to existing tier ones that they need to decide where they're going to play in this future value chain.
Yeah, it's very interesting that some of the strategy work we're doing for companies is to look about how do you devalue the typical tier one position, and then for tier ones and tier twos, how do you recreate value so that they can have a more positive role in the value chain. So tier ones being able to have more of a direct customer interface with the new connectivity, tier twos bringing new services in, and then OEMs looking at how they reduce cost is certainly an area that's very active for us from a product strategy point of view.
Yeah, very nice. I think we're running up against our time. Any final comments, gentlemen, on any other topic? This is a very intriguing space. I think it will continue to evolve, certainly. Any final takeaways?
Well, I think one of the important points here is we're looking at exponential growth in the number of autonomous vehicles produced and operating on the road over the next decade. There's a significant market, obviously, for autonomous services, and also the supply of the AD stack. So we've done a lot of work looking at growth areas within the supply of autonomous vehicle components in the stack. Clearly, we've got a white paper coming out, which you can check out when that's released, and obviously contact us for a bit more insight in that area into specific growth opportunities in the supply chain for the AD stack.
Yeah, and I guess my key thoughts here from this discussion is really about how much autonomous is likely to change the value chain and how this impacts the suppliers, both commercial vehicles and passenger cars that we're seeing heading towards autonomous deployments. and really the fact that there's going to be a significant amount of pressure on reducing the hardware costs on vehicles, and a big rise in terms of the value of software. And the question then is, how do OEMs, tier ones, tier twos take advantage of that situation, either to protect their business because they're mostly mechanical or electronic system hardware today, or else because they already have software capabilities and there's a chance for them to be able to leverage that. And I think I mentioned earlier, a number of our studies that we're doing for companies is to really evaluate that competitive positioning for them over the next 5 years.
Yeah, very fascinating discussion. I think we are up against our time right now. We will conclude our session, but we will pick up on another topic soon. We have a white paper on this specific topic coming up. It will be published on our website. We'll provide the link in this presentation also on our website, so be on the lookout for that. And we'll be in touch soon on other connectivity and autonomous topics very shortly. Thank you for tuning in.
Thank you.